At the outset, I would like to thank the Indian Academy of Sciences for giving me an opportunity to present the research of my group. So in this talk, what I would try to do is that I will try to tell you about the recent developments that have come out from our group on developing very high resolution timescales of tectonic processes in very old rocks and very hot rocks here. Now, many of this topic will be new to, I think, most of you, and there will be terminology which is aligned to you. So what I will try to do in the couple of slides is to introduce the geological terms that I will be using, and also the geological problems that I am addressing, and also the results that we have made in developing a new tool to study this kind of processes, which is a diffusion chronometry tool here. Now, my study over the years has centered around understanding the orogenesis in past and present setting here. So orogenesis is essentially mountain building processes here. So in the two diagrams below, I have tried to show you the two fundamental types of orogenesis, one in which oceanic lithosphere subducts below a continental lithosphere or an oceanic lithosphere. We call this kind of orogenesis is subduction orogenesis. And there is a second one where bow continental masses, they approach towards each other at the termination of subduction and they collide. And this produces continental collision. The best example of continental collision is in the Himalayan mountain ranges here. But whereas subduction zone setting orogenesis is best example in this diagram is the Indonesian Java or subduction system here. And in fossil record, the subduction zone orogenesis can also be seen in rocks in Nagaland and Manipur in the present Indo-Burmese ranges here. And collisional orogenesis in the present day, we see, I have studied in the Arunachal Himalaya here. Orogenesis has also taken place in geological past, particularly in the Precambrian shields of India. There are old eroded remnants of older mountain wells here. So I have studied in the Aravalli Delhi mobile belt, Rajasthan, in Central Indian tectonic zone, in Central India, in the Eastern Ghats belt, and also in very old rocks in the Dharwad Craton in South India. Over the years, my emphasis in studying orogenesis is to know the thermal and baric evolutionary history during orogenesis and the timescales and rate processes over which this operates, and also how orogenesis leads to amalgamation of continental blocks. And when it occurs in a global scale, it produces supercontinents. So my emphasis over the years is to see this kind of evidence of supercontinent tectonics from Indian rocks here. So what is how we study orogenesis of the different types of rocks? Metamorphic rocks are ideally suited as fossil tectonic recorders and also timekeepers. So in this diagram to the left, I am trying to show you what happens during orogenesis. So essentially what happens that rocks are, there is material transport of rocks from the surface towards downward. When it goes from towards downward, there is burial and there is also heating. And also after it reaches the maximum depth, the rocks is also transported to shallower level. During that process, there is exhumation of the rocks, there is a lessening of overburden pressure, and also there is cooling. Now, this changes in temperature and pressure condition during orogenesis is generally studied in the form of some diagram, which is called in pressure temperature diagram, where there is this path shown in blue. This is where it tracks the progressive evolution in pressure and temperature during orogenesis. We call it metamorphic pressure temperature. This kind of paths can be reconstructed through forward modeling techniques by solution of heat flow equation, where it involves the three important terms here: heat conduction term, the heat advection term, and heat generation term here. The second way by which pressure temperature path of evolution can also be reconstructed through inverse modeling, where we study rocks, the minerals, and their compositions, and by studying equilibrium thermodynamics and using thermometric and barometric equations, and we calculate from their intersection a PT condition of metamorphism at a particular metamorphic state. And also in the rock record, there are minerals. As the pressure and temperature condition changes during orogenesis, there are metamorphic reactions, and textures give us the direction in which this reaction has progressed. By plotting this reaction in PT space, what we do here is that we together with this PT condition, we ultimately reconstruct this kind of pressure temperature trajectory here. Apart from this PT parts, the other important part is the time scales over which this process is here. When it forms and what is the temperature at which it's formed. So this is done by using certain mineral chronometers and thermometers. JIRCON is ideally suited there. So by measuring isotope ratios and also titanium concentration, one can develop a path like this. This is called temperature time paths, which tells us about, say, this is temperature and this is the direction, is the amount of time that progress. So this is the path where temperature is increasing. That is the heating up of the during orogenesis. This is, it reaches maximum thermal condition, and this is the path over which the rocks undergo cooling. So this is the time scales over which this heating cooling occurs. This is a very, very important information about developing tectonic construct. Now, in natural rocks, particularly for those conditions where temperature condition reaches in excess of 900 degrees Celsius, we call it ultra-high temperature condition. There are three broad types of orogenesis we have recorded in rock record. This is shown by three different types of paths. The path 1, which is shown in blue, is a very short-lived single cycle heating cooling path here. Whereas path 2 is where it's a very long-lived, the duration over which the rocks were there at more than 900 degrees Celsius is essentially where you have very high temperature condition, where so long duration is there. And the third one, where there is multiple cycles of heating and cooling, we call it as pulsating UHT. Now, the problem through normal geochronological methods or thermochronological methods to reconstruct pulsating temperature time paths, there is a problem. The problem is that, so this is an example, is a schematic diagram. So problem is that once you have the first cycle is complete, the M1 cycle, when you reheat this rock, the rocks become residual and dry. It is very difficult to develop new JIRCONs. And if there is no JIRCON, you cannot have dates. Secondly is that the uranium-late JIRCON geochronology, they have errors of around 10 to 20 million years. And sometimes it is much larger than the timescales over which the heating cooling path occurs, which is of the order of 5 to 10 million years. And what happens then, very often we see that we have dates and we have temperature, and we draw these lines and we get a average time integrated cooling rate, which is essentially much, which is not the exact situation. So what is then the solution here? So we developed a diffusion chronometry tool here. This is a kinetic process with a quantitative law, and it gives you the duration of the chain process over which it operates. Most importantly, this is very widespread in rock record, and this is a continuous phenomena. There is no break in this. And timescales can be directly related to changes in pressure and temperature condition. And also the resolution is independent of the age of rocks. So I give you an example of the basic principles of diffusion chronometry by using an exchange reaction, FeMg exchange reaction between two minerals, garnet and orthopyroxene. So at equilibrium, let's say at 1000 degrees Celsius, the minerals garnet and orthopyroxene are compositionally homogeneous at equilibrium, and their composition is essentially given by the partition coefficient here. And if it's at 650 degrees Celsius, the partition coefficient changes and you have a new composition, but still the minerals are compositionally homogeneous. But if there is a cooling history from high temperature to low temperature rock, low temperature condition, and because MgFe diffusivity is very low, sluggish, so what happens? You have a compositional zoning in these two minerals. This is shown by this diffusion profile here. If you have a diffusion profile in this mineral, in coexisting minerals, what happens here? You can solve three important equations here. The first law is the Fick's second law of diffusion. By knowing the profile here, and also the diffusion coefficient we can get from experimental constants, and by knowing the change in concentration, we can retrieve the duration over which this happens here. And this is the other equations, relays diffusion coefficient, it changes with time and temperature, and also the partition coefficient. And this has been applied, this new diffusion chronometry tool has been applied in very old rocks, 1.6 GA old rocks from central India. and this is very hot. And for this, we have used a rock, which is the garnet orthopyroxene granulite, which has an exceptional memory of changing thermal and baric evolution in the form of changing mineralogy and also changing mineral composition. So using equilibrium mineral composition at different metamorphic stages, we have been able to establish or obtain PT condition of metamorphism, and by joining them, we have a very complicated thermal and baric evolution history here. You see here, there are 3 cycles here. So each cycle of heating and cooling, this is also heating and cooling, this is also heating and cooling. So there are 3 cycles of metamorphism we have recorded from these rocks here. And what are the advantages of the garnet orthopyroxene diffusion chronometry that we are applying here? First thing is that garnet orthopyroxene is a good thermometer to establish or to retrieve very high temperature metamorphic condition and also high temperature cooling history. Also, the FEMG diffusion data of garnet orthopyroxene are now available. The numerical codes have been developed, which can consider any arbitrary initial composition and also any arbitrary pressure temperature path over which the orogenesis has occurred. It also considered mass balance constant of the exchanging cations. And most importantly, which has not been done before, is both the diffusion profiles of both the minerals can be modeled. In this assumption, we have considered the initial condition as garnet or orthopyroxene is compositionally homogeneous, and boundary condition is considered that partition coefficient at each time changes as a function of temperature computed from garnet orthopyroxene thermometry of Li and Ganguly. So now see the results here. So what we have done here in such a complicated multiple pulses of orogenesis, what we have done here is that we have started from the last event and we progressively go backward. So what we have done here, we have considered the M3 cycle first, the cooling event here. So for that, we have considered a garnet orthopyroxene compositional domain, and we have taken a profile, and this is the diffusion profile here. And we have fitted this, and for that, we have established a duration of around 5 million years. Now we go back further behind here. So what we do here is that now we go back to a situation where the diffusion clock started from the peak M2 metamorphism, and it is cooling history, and it is again loading and cooling. So we have, for that, we have chosen a garnet orthopyroxene profile which has this memory here. The advantage here is that M3 cooling history is already obtained previously. So the unknown is that cooling from M2 peak to M2 retrograde and M2 retrograde to the M3 peak. So this is the diffusion profile. We have fitted this, and we have obtained the time scales of around 7.5 million years for this cooling history and very rapid heating and loading for this. And we have slightly adjusted the M3 cooling from 5 to 4.5 million years. Now we are left with the earliest stages of history here, for which we have considered another textural and compositional domain, and for which we are modeling this particular stages, the cooling from M1P to M1 retrograde, and that's heating of the M2 stage and its cooling. And this is a very long profile, and we have fitted this, and for which we have obtained this time scales for this. Now, summarizing these results, what we see here in this diagram, we now have been able to allocate the duration or time scales over which this has happened. So this is unprecedented new details of the time scales over which different segments of orogenic stages have been established here. So what is important here is that the orogenic time scales is of the order of 50 million years, and it is also supported independently from zircon and monazite dating, which is around 51 to 56 million years. The second important findings is that the resolution of the time scales is of the order of 1 to 2 million years in very hot and old rocks. This is significant finding. Geochronology doesn't give that kind of resolution. Thirdly, we have been able to derive timescales for multiple thermal pulses or pulsating events here. In this case, the first thermal pulse is the hottest. So it is at a temperature of around 1000 degrees Celsius, and is also the longest, more than 35 million years duration. And it is also the cooling history of around 10 degrees Celsius per million years. Whereas later pulses are progressively cooler, where the temperature maximum thermal condition changes from 900 to 735 degrees Celsius. And it is also very shortly, 5 to 10 million years, and also have a faster cooling rate here. And also we have been able to establish the burial and exhumation rates of 30 to 2 kilometers per million year. So what are the uncertainties of this diffusion chronometry calculation? The uncertainties come from, so for example, from the interdiffusion coefficient of Mg and Fe, which essentially comes from the errors in calculation or measurements of activation energy of diffusion from experiments. The largest uncertainties come from the pressure and temperature estimates. So whatever we have done here is that we have seen how much error is propagated for, say, for example, for a plus minus 25 degrees Celsius error in temperature estimation. So we have seen that diffusion fits remain robust. And say, for example, if it is the temperature estimate is error is 50 degrees Celsius, we see that diffusion fits deteriorate. So for if it is an overestimation by 50 degrees Celsius. And what we have also seen is that the calculated time scales remains largely unaffected even after pressure uncertainty of 1 kilobar here. So what is important here is that we have applied this in, say, very hot rocks, and this methodology we are now applying this into n-member situations here. One in very old rocks from South India, which has a history of when the plate tectonics in planet Earth became advent, and the other extreme we are trying to fit it in subduction settings, say for example from the Nagaland Ophiolite complex, where we have seen euclogite facies rocks. There are new findings which records ultra high pressure metamorphism, where the burial has gone to a depth of 100 kilometers or more. And we are trying to see that why we are able to find out the time scales over which the subduction system have evolved over time. Now, this particular findings have been published in two journals here, one in Earth and Planetary Science Letters, and the other one in Journal of Petrology. And at the end, I would like to acknowledge my long-standing collaboration with several people, Professor Somnath Dasgupta from Calcutta, Professor Sumit Chakraborty, Ruhr University, Bochum, who is my collaborator in this diffusion chronometry work, Naresh Abhinav Roy, Professor Michael Wright, Beatrice Spearing, Simon Weil, Jeff Clark, Trevor Ireland, and Jonathan Atchison. And I also benefited hugely with my students over the years, Amit, Lopamudra, Onduva, Sriparna, and Aliba. And I have also have very generous funding from DST, CSA, DAD, INSA, DFG, from Carleton University, DSD, SRF, and also from host institution, IIT Kharagpur. So with this, I come to an end to my talk. So if there are queries, I will be able to address them.